William Blake, he's so often remembered as this highly mystical, almost unapproachable figure, right? Well, today, in this explainer, we're completely decoding his visionary genius. And we're going to do it by anchoring his work strictly in the hard facts. We're talking exact dates, specific literary styles, precise publication years. Because you see, by grounding those absolutely wild visions of his into concrete history, we're actually going to uncover the rigorous manual discipline that was behind his lifelong rebellion. Let's dive in. So here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with the making of a rebel, move into the master of contraries, then forging a personal mythology, look at the late prophetic epics, and wrap up with his visual art and critical legacy. All right, part one, the making of a rebel. Let's ground ourselves in the 18th century. Born in Soho, London in 1757. Now, fast forward to 1772. He's just 15 years old, and he's apprenticed to an antiquarian engraver named James Baher. This is crucial because it permanently ingrained in him this deep, deep reverence for Gothic art. Then, in 1779, he gets admitted to the Royal Academy, which, ironically enough, is exactly what sparked his fierce anti-academic aesthetic. He just hated the rigid structure there. And then we hit 1783, the year he publishes Poetical Sketches. Pay special attention to 1783 because historically, this is incredibly important. It's his one and only conventionally printed letterpress collection. Because right after this, he completely changes the game. So what did he do? Well, following a profound spiritual vision of his late brother Robert in 1787, Blake actually invents a whole new method called relief etching. He figured out how to unify text and visual art onto a single copper plate. It's brilliant. He literally took the means of production into his own hands, entirely bypassing those standard conventional publishers, a true indie artist before the term even existed. And by 1789, he applies this brand new method to the Book of Cell. This is his first major narrative executed entirely in relief etching. Now, what's really interesting about this 1789 text is his specific literary style. He composed it in what are called septenaries, these really long, sweeping 14-syllable lines. And this elongated meter perfectly matches the subject matter. It's an allegory about an unborn soul named Thel, who is absolutely terrified of entering physical embodiment, what he calls the House of Clay. Okay, moving right along to Section 2, the Master of Contraries. As we move into the 1790s, Blake starts completely inverting the orthodox views of his day. Totally flipping them upside down. He formalizes this radical antinomian theology. Basically, that's the belief that inner faith absolutely overrides strict moral law. So while 18th century orthodoxy viewed God as the strict external judge, Blake radically redefines good as just passive reason, and he redefines evil as active, creative energy. He literally saw those orthodox moral laws as nothing more than restrictive nets used to suppress humanity's true potential. Building on that tension, notice this exact stylistic shift that's finalized in 1794. That's when he publishes Songs of Innocence and of Experience. And he didn't just change the thematic content, he changed the fundamental syntax and phonology to match. Innocence is full of soft consonants, very predictable lullaby rhythms, and simple declarative sentences. But Experience, it completely shatters that. He uses these harsh plosives, hard B's, P's, and T's, broken metric patterns, and really complex clauses filled with unanswered questions. It's a total vibe shift, engineered through grammar. So the crucial point here, the devastating result of that world of experience, is perfectly captured in his iconic 1794 poem London, with the phrase, mind-forged manacles. It's just a brilliant phrase. He's saying that commercial laws, the physical mapping of city streets, puritanical moral codes, they don't just oppress us from the outside. No, they actually create these internalized psychological prisons. We literally chain our own minds. Which brings us to Section 3, forging a personal mythology. As we hit 1797, Blake's critique of society expands into this massive, highly intricate fourfold system. Starting with his epic Vala, or the Four Zoas, he literally maps out the shattered psyche of a primordial giant named Albion. And he categorizes this with incredible precision. You have Urizen, which is reason associated with the south and the eyes. Then Urthona, representing imagination, the north and the ears. Luva is emotion, tied to the east and the nostrils. And finally, Tharmas is the body, the west and the tongue. It's a dense system, but it shows precisely how reason, imagination, emotion, and the physical body are constantly warring against each other in our material world. Taking a brief breather from all that dense mythology, let's look at this incredibly famous phrase coined around 1804 in the preface to his epic Milton, dark satanic mills. Now, this perfectly summarizes his critique of the Industrial Revolution. But here's the thing. He wasn't just attacking literal physical factories. He was actually attacking the cold, mechanistic logic of Enlightenment thinkers, guys like Locke and Newton. He felt they treated human beings as nothing more than mere components in a giant machine. And all of this builds into a very strict framework for how we actually perceive the world. Blake perfectly maps out our psychological ascent through 4 distinct states. It's like climbing a ladder. We start down at the bottom, in Ulro. That's the materialistic dead end of single vision or that cold Newtonian logic we just talked about. Then we step up to generation, which is the physical world of action and twofold vision. Next up is Bula, kind of a dreamy resting state of threefold vision. And finally, at the very top, we arrive at Eden, fourfold vision. And that is the absolute liberty of the fully active imagination. All right, section 4, the elite prophetic epics. Let's anchor this next era around the turn of the century, specifically 1803, because a deeply traumatic, real-world event really fuels the creation of his longest epic poems. In 1803, Blake gets into a physical altercation with a soldier named John Schofield, right in his own garden. This actually led to Blake being indicted for sedition. Now, he was acquitted the next year in 1804, but that arrest, it massively intensified his distrust of the state, and it directly inspired the grand themes of accusation, self-annihilation, and absolute forgiveness that absolutely dominate his 2 late epics, Milton and Jerusalem. In his epic Milton, he specifically divides humanity, those living under moral law, into 3 distinct groups. You have the elect, who are the self-righteous protectors of the status quo. Then the redeemed, who live in the state of perpetual doubt and fear. But then you have the third class, the reprobate. Now, to the world, these are the transgressors, the social outcasts. But for Blake, they are the true visionary prophets. He firmly believed that it was society's outcasts who actually retained their real imaginative power. Moving on to his longest epic, Jerusalem, which he worked on from about 1804 until 1820. In it, we see the eternal prophet Los, who works at a blacksmith's forge. But pay attention to the anatomy here. Los's bellows represent human lungs, and his hammer beats out the exact rhythm of the human heart. It is just such a beautiful detail. It perfectly illustrates how Blake inextricably linked the physical biological labor of the human body directly to the divine act of artistic creation. Mind and body totally united. And that brings us to our final chapter, Section 5. Visual art and critical legacy. Looking past 1820, let's examine one of his late visual masterpieces, The Ghost of a Flea, completed right around 1819 to 1820. Now, Blake actually claimed that fleas were inhabited by the souls of bloodthirsty men, confined to these tiny insect bodies just so they couldn't depopulate the earth. Pretty wild, right? But notice the hard, factual aesthetic details behind that wild vision. His meticulous technique, painting in tempera, which he called fresco, showcases this highly defined musculature that was heavily influenced by his deep study of Michelangelo. There is a highly structured artistic discipline anchoring the madness. Now, for over a century, Blake's long epics were pretty much dismissed as just the disorganized ramblings of a madman. People just didn't get it. But then, in 1947, a critic named Northrop Frye publishes a book called Fearful Symmetry, and Frye proved that Blake wasn't rambling at all. He was actually utilizing very precise universal literary archetypes derived from the Bible, mapping them into 4 seasonal mythi. You have spring as comedy, summer is romance, autumn as tragedy, and winter as satire. This 1947 critical rehabilitation was a total game changer. It proved once and for all that Blake's personal mythology was actually a conscious, highly systematic restructuring of Western literature. So, knowing the strict chronology of his rebellion, his literal invention of new print technologies, and his incredibly precise restructuring of human psychology, we have to ask ourselves, do Blake's 18th century warnings against those mind-forged manacles still echo in our modern hyperstructured world today? Are we currently trapped in single vision, or are we actively fighting for that fourfold liberty? It's something to think about. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep asking those big questions.